Her dog escaped into the mafia boss's penthouse. She had to join his family lunch to get him back. Lena Moore existed in the quiet spaces. She lived in apartment 12A of the Navarro Grand, a building designed for people who owned sections of the city, not rented small corners of it. Her unit was the architectural equivalent of a clerical error, a one-bedroom tucked away by the service elevators, a concession to zoning laws that the building's wealthy tenants likely resented. The rest of the tower was duplexes and triplexes, glass walls and private terraces. Lena had a window that faced a brick wall and a collection of watercolors she was trying to sell online. She was a freelance illustrator, which was a polite way of saying she worried about her electric bill and chased invoices for $300. Her life was a study in beige and gray, a soft, sensitive existence that felt perpetually bruised. She was 27, but the last year had felt like 10. First, the breakup with David, a man who loved her art but not her silences, who told her she was too fragile to handle the real world. Then, the estrangement from her family, a final, disastrous phone call with her mother that ended in a familiar, cold silence. Her only consistent comfort was Peanut, a 10-pound terrier mix with mismatched ears and a crippling case of anxiety that mirrored her own. He was, officially, her emotional support animal, a warm, breathing anchor in the quiet drift of her days. He was the one living thing that didn't ask her to be louder, stronger, or different. He just needed her, and she, in turn, needed to be needed. She worked from a small desk in her living room, painting delicate botanicals for wedding invitations that paid pennies on the dollar. The silence of her apartment was often broken by the sounds from the hallway, the confident, heavy footsteps of men in expensive shoes, the musical laughter of women who had never checked a price tag. And then there were the sounds from across the hall, from the penthouse, Penthouse B. It wasn't just an apartment, it was a fortress. She had never seen the occupant, but the rumors were as thick as the imported marble in the lobby. The doormen, usually chatty, would stiffen when that elevator was called. She'd heard whispers in the laundry room. De Laurentiis. Shipping, they say, but not cargo. Drug money. Mafia. Terrifying men. Lena just kept her head down. The hallway was a border she never crossed until that Tuesday. It was 3 p.m, that dead, gray part of the day when her motivation always failed. She was taking Peanut out for his midday walk. She clipped the leash to his harness in the small entryway of 12A, fumbling with the clasp. "Okay, buddy, let's go," she whispered. She opened her door and, at the same instant, the heavy, polished oak door of Penthouse B swung open. A man in a dark suit was exiting, his back to her, speaking into a phone. He left the door ajar, just a 6-inch gap. Peanut, who was usually as timid as she was, saw the gap. Perhaps it was the smell or the sudden opportunity for adventure, but he tensed, let out a tiny, excited yip, and bolted. He shot out of her grasp before she could even register it. The leash handle slapped against her fingers and was gone. "Peanut, no!" Her voice was a strangled gasp, but the dog was already gone, a small brown and white blur disappearing through the gap into the lion's den. Lena froze. Her heart didn't just pound, it seized, a cold fist clamping down in her chest. This was not just a dog, this was her lifeline. She heard a sound from inside the penthouse, not shouting, but a deep, resonant murmur of conversation, and then a small, sharp bark, Peanut's bark. She hesitated for 1 second, too. The rumors played through her head. Terrifying men, mafia. But the thought of Peanut, small, scared Peanut, lost in there, was worse. "Peanut!" she called out, louder this time, her voice trembling. She ran the 20 feet of hallway and, without knocking, pushed the heavy door open. It glided silently. No creak, of course. Expensive hinges. The first thing that struck her was the smell. It wasn't her world of instant ramen and weak coffee. This was roasted garlic, red wine, thyme, and rich, savory meat. It was the smell of wealth, of power. She stepped onto a marble foyer that was larger than her entire apartment. Through a wide, arched doorway, she saw it, A dining room. A long, dark wood table that could have seated 25. It was full. Men in immaculate dark suits, their tailoring sharp enough to cut. Women with hair like spun glass and diamonds at their throats, their eyes as cold and brilliant as the jewels. It was a lavish family lunch, frozen in time, and there, at the feet of the man at the head of the table, was Peanut. He was yapping, his tail wagging, as the man leaned down, a piece of bread in his long, elegant fingers. The moment Lena stepped through the archway, the conversation stopped. It didn't fade. It was cut, like a switch being thrown. 20 pairs of eyes, all of them assessing, cold and surprised, turned to her, to Lena. In her paint-smeared gray sweatshirt, her black leggings with the small, persistent hole in the knee, and her fuzzy pink socks, because she hadn't bothered to put on shoes. Her breath evaporated. She felt like a mouse that had just run into a convention of eagles. But she only saw him, the man at the head of the table. He was mid-conversation, a heavy crystal glass of red wine held halfway to his lips. He didn't startle. He didn't scowl. He just watched her. His eyes, she thought, were the darkest she had ever seen, almost black. They held her, pinned her to the spot. He wasn't handsome in the way David had been, all soft smiles and easy charm. This man's face was a collection of sharp, aristocratic angles, a strong jaw, a straight nose. His dark hair was brushed back from his forehead, untouched by gray. His power was not a suggestion. It was a fact, present in his stillness, in the perfect lethal cut of his navy suit. A small, slow smile touched one side of his mouth. It was not a kind smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated amusement, and beneath it, something else, a flicker of intrigue. He was cataloging her, from her messy bun to her ridiculous socks, and he was not displeased. "Peanut," Lena choked out, the word tearing from her dry throat. "I'm so sorry. He ran in. I didn't—" The man, Matteo De Laurentiis, finally looked away from her face, down at the yapping dog. He dropped the bread, which Peanut devoured. "He has excellent taste." The man's voice was smooth, a low baritone that vibrated with absolute confidence. It had an accent, but not one she could place, the polished, transatlantic sound of old money and East Coast boarding schools. He looked back at Lena. He gestured with a long-fingered hand to the single empty chair at the long table, to his right. He was just informing us that he was expecting a guest. "Please, sit." It was not a request. It was a command, wrapped in the silks of civility. He nodded to a hulking man who stood against the far wall, a man who hadn't moved a muscle until that nod. "Gianni, pour the lady a glass of wine." "No," Lena stammered, shaking her head, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No, I can't. I'm sorry. I just need my dog. I'll go. I'm so sorry to interrupt." She took one desperate step toward Peanut, her hand outstretched. A shadow moved, blocking her. A woman who had been seated near the head of the table rose gracefully. She was beautiful, with the same dark hair and sharp, high cheekbones as the man. Her red dress was a slash of color in the dark-suited room. "You must be the neighbor," the woman said. Her smile was a dazzling, perfect, and utterly cold display of white teeth. "From 12A, I'm Sophia, Matteo's sister." She didn't offer a hand. She just stood there, a polite, immovable, and fragrant barrier. "You can't just run off now. You've interrupted the blessing." Lena's eyes flew back to the man, Matteo. He was watching her, that amused, terrifying glint still in his eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I just want Peanut. He's all I have." The admission was out before she could stop it. A small, pathetic truth laid bare on the marble floor. Matteo sipped his wine. He set the glass down. The soft click of crystal on wood echoed in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. Peanut. His adventure over, curled up near Matteo's polished black shoe, and went to sleep. "Of course you can take your dog," Matteo said. His voice was all charm, a velvet glove. "After you've finished your meal," he gestured to the chair again. "We're in the middle of a family lunch. It would be rude of you to leave. and it would be very rude of me." His eyes darkened. "To let a guest go hungry, especially a neighbor." The menace was there. It wasn't in his words. Not really. It was in the air. It was in the stillness of the other men. It was in the sharp, assessing glint in Sophia's eyes. Lena understood. She was a disruption, a loose thread. She'd seen something she shouldn't have. Not a crime, but a family. And he would not let her go until he had decided what, exactly, he was going to do with her. She was a mouse, and the king of the eagles wanted to see if she could fly. "I don't have an appetite," she whispered, her hands clenched at her sides. "You will," Matteo said, his voice soft but utterly final. Her legs felt like they were moving through wet cement. Slowly, every instinct screaming at her to run, Lena Moore walked to the empty chair beside the most dangerous man she had ever seen. The man, Gianni, pulled it out for her. She sank into the plush velvet. Gianni poured a deep, blood-red wine into a crystal glass in front of her. She stared at it, her reflection warped and tiny in the dark liquid. The next hour was the longest of Lena's life. A plate was silently placed in front of her, pasta with a rich, dark sauce. Then came fish, roasted with lemons, and platters of meat. The smells were overwhelming. Lena's stomach, which had been empty since a piece of toast that morning, was a cold, tight knot of fear. She couldn't lift her fork. "Eat," Matteo said quietly. He wasn't looking at her. He was cutting a piece of steak, his movements economical and precise. She picked up the fork. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely spear a piece of pasta. She brought it to her mouth. It tasted like ash. She forced herself to chew, to swallow. The conversation around her resumed, as if a switch had been flicked back on. It was a performance. They talked about business, but the words they used were clearly not the words they meant. The shipment from the south, an older man with a face like a Roman coin, said, "It was delayed by custom." Matteo took a sip of his wine. "Customs is a temporary problem," he said, his voice casual. "The rats eating the shipment from the inside are the permanent ones." His sister, Sophia, laughed, a high, musical sound. "We should send a new exterminator. Matteo, the last one was clearly incompetent." They were not talking about pasta. They were not talking about rats. And all through it, Lena felt Matteo's attention. He was the center of the table, leading the conversation, making decisions. But his focus, a thin, hot thread, was on her. He wasn't staring, but he was aware. He saw the pain on her cuticles. He saw the way her throat moved when she forced herself to swallow. He saw the tremor in her hand when she reached for her water glass. She felt stripped bare, flayed open and studied like an insect. She wanted to be invisible, to shrink into nothing. But she had never been more visible in her life. She was the one gray mouse in a den of sleek, black-tufted panthers. She ate the pasta, pushing it around her plate until it was gone. When the man, Gianni, moved to refill her wine, she put her hand over the glass. "No, thank you." Matteo turned his head, his dark eyes landing on her fully for the first time since she'd sat. "Dessert?" "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Thank you for the meal, but I really have to go. Please." She met his gaze. "I need to go home." He studied her for a long, silent moment. The entire table seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for his cue. He was looking for something in her eyes: weakness, defiance, fear. She was sure he found all three. Finally, he gave a small, sharp nod. "Gianni, get the lady's dog." It was over. The relief was so sudden, so potent, it made her dizzy. Gianni gently scooped up the sleeping peanut and handed him to her. Lena grabbed him, clutching his warm, familiar body to her chest so hard he let out a small whimper. "Thank you," she mumbled, pushing her chair back. "I'll walk you out," Matteo said. He stood. Instantly, the entire table stood with him. She didn't wait. She turned and walked, fast, back through the marble foyer. She could feel him behind her, his long, easy strides keeping pace. He smelled like wine and expensive cologne and something else, something metallic and cold. She reached the massive front door. Her hand was on the handle when his own hand landed on the wood just above her head, blocking her. "You're shaking," he observed. His voice was different now. The performance for his family was over. This was quiet. This was intimate. And it was 1,000 times more terrifying. "I'm sorry I interrupted," she said, her cheek pressed against Peanut's fur, not looking at the man. "You're not sorry," he said, "but you are frightened." He leaned in, just slightly. She could feel the heat radiating from his suit. "You should be. Let me go." "You don't belong in this building," he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to go right through her. "Your apartment is a clerical error. You're a stray, just like him." He nodded at Peanut. Tears of pure humiliation and terror stung her eyes. "Please." "But," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "you're interesting." His fingers, the ones that had held the wine glass, brushed her wrist, the one clutching her dog. It wasn't a caress. It wasn't a grab. It was a brand, a marking. Just one light, deliberate graze of his skin against hers, right over the frantic, hammering pulse point. "Have a good evening, Lena." He knew her name. How did he know her name? He stepped back. She didn't say another word. She ripped the door open and scrambled 20 feet to her own apartment, fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to get the key in the lock. She burst inside, slammed the door shut, and slid the deadbolt. She leaned against the solid wood, her chest heaving, her eyes screwed shut. Peanut wriggled, and she let him drop to the floor. He ran to his water bowl, unfazed. Lena slid down the door until she was sitting on her cheap welcome mat, her head in her hands. That night, she didn't sleep. Her small beige apartment had always been her sanctuary. Now it felt flimsy. The deadbolt felt like paper. The brick wall outside her window felt like a cage. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the meal, the coded words, the ice in Sophia's eyes, the absolute, effortless power of the man who commanded that room, and him, the way he watched her. The low, terrible intimacy in his voice, the brush of his fingers against her skin. She should be repulsed. She was repulsed. She was terrified. But as the hours ticked by, and the first gray light of dawn crept into her room, she had to admit to a small, dark, and shameful truth. Underneath the terror, a feeling she hadn't had in years was sparking to life. It wasn't just fear, it was a thrill, the terrible, undeniable thrill of being truly seen. The morning sun that filtered into apartment 12A was pale and unconvincing, casting long, gray shadows across Lena's drafting table. She sat with a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, staring at a half-finished watercolor of a peony. The petals looked bruised, the pinks muddying into browns. She could not find the light. At 9 o'clock, a sharp, authoritative knock on her door shattered the silence. Lena froze. Peanut, curled under her chair, let out a low growl. She moved to the peephole, her socks sliding silently on the hardwood, through the fisheye lens. She saw 2 men. They were not the police, and they were certainly not selling subscriptions. They wore charcoal suits that fit too well and sunglasses that hid their eyes. Despite the dim hallway lighting, she did not open the door. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice thin. "Delivery for Miss Moore," one of them said. His voice was flat, devoid of any regional accent. "Leave it on the mat," she said. There was a pause, a heavy silence where she could feel them assessing the strength of the wood between them. Then, the sound of paper sliding against the floor. "Have a good day, Miss Moore." She waited 5 full minutes after their footsteps faded toward the elevator before she unlocked the deadbolt. Lying on her cheap welcome mat was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy. She brought it inside and tore it open with trembling fingers. A stack of bills slid out, crisp, fresh $100 bills, $5,000. At a glance, more money than she had made in the last 4 months combined. Tucked behind the cash was a note on heavy cardstock, written in a bold, angular hand with black ink. "Lunch was delightful. I'd like to see you again." Lena stared at the money, then at the note. Her stomach churned. It felt like a transaction. It felt like he was paying her for the entertainment she had provided, or perhaps putting a down payment on something else. Anger, hot and sudden, flared in her chest, burning away the lingering fear from the day before. She marched to her kitchen trash can and threw the envelope, cash, note, and all, into the garbage. "I'm not a stray," she whispered to the empty room. She tried to work. She forced herself to sit at her desk, to mix pigments, to focus on the delicate curve of a stamen. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, Matteo De Laurentiis. She saw the way his hand had looked against the white tablecloth, the dark intelligence in his eyes, the terrifying grace with which he commanded the room. She felt the ghost of his touch on her wrist, a phantom burn that cold water couldn't wash away. By afternoon, the walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in. She needed air. She needed to feel normal. "Walk?" she asked Peanut. The dog perked up, tail thumping against the floor. Outside, the city was loud and chaotic, usually a source of anxiety for Lena, but today it felt like a shield. Crowds meant witnesses. She walked briskly, keeping Peanut on a short leash, heading toward the park 3 blocks away. The air was crisp, smelling of exhaust and roasted nuts. She was 2 blocks away from the Navarro Grand when she felt the prickle on the back of her neck. It was an ancient instinct, the feeling of being hunted. She glanced over her shoulder. Traffic was heavy, a river of yellow taxis and delivery trucks. But cruising in the right lane, keeping pace with her walking speed, was a black sedan. It had tinted windows, darker than legal limits allowed. Lena stopped walking. The car stopped. She turned abruptly and walked into a convenience store. She stood in the aisle, pretending to look at protein bars, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Through the front window, she saw the black car idling at the curb. It waited. Panic rose in her throat, tasting like copper. She bought a bottle of water she didn't want just to have a reason to be there, then exited and practically ran the rest of the way home, taking a zigzagging route through an alleyway. When she finally burst into the lobby of her building, the doorman looked up, startled by her pallor. "Everything all right, Miss Moore?" "Fine," she gasped. "Just running?" She didn't breathe easily until she was back behind her triple-locked door. The sun went down, taking Lena's courage with it. Night fell over the city, turning the view from her window into a grid of electric lights. She sat on her sofa, Peanut's head in her lap, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor. She hadn't turned on the lights. She didn't want to be a silhouette. At 10 o'clock, the scratching started. It was faint at first, metal on metal, then the distinct sound of the doorknob turning. Slowly, deliberately. Lena bolted upright, clutching Peanut to her chest to silence him. She stared at the door. The lock held, but the knob turned again, more forcefully this time. Then came a thud, a shoulder hitting the wood. "Police," she whispered to herself. "Call the police." Her hands shook so badly she dropped her phone twice before dialing. 911, what is your emergency? "Someone is trying to break into my apartment," Lena hissed, retreating to the bathroom, the farthest point from the door. "I'm at the Navarro Grand, the apartment 12A. "The Navarro Grand?" the dispatcher repeated. The tone of the voice changed instantly. It went from urgent to hesitant. "Are you sure, ma'am? That building has private security." "I don't care. Someone is kicking my door." "We'll send a unit to check the perimeter," the dispatcher said, sounding bored. "It's likely just a confused neighbor." "Sit tight." The call ended. Lena stared at the screen in disbelief. They weren't coming. Or if they were, they weren't rushing. The thudding at the door stopped. Silence reclaimed the hallway, but the safety was gone. Her sanctuary had been violated, not by entry, but by the realization that the walls were paper thin and the law didn't apply here. 10 minutes later, her phone rang. It wasn't the police. The number was blocked. She answered it, her voice trembling. "Hello?" "Pack a bag." The voice was low, rich, and unmistakable. "Matteo." "What?" Lena gripped the counter. "Who is this?" "You know who it is," he said. He sounded calm, terrifyingly unbothered. "I heard about the attempt on your door. The police won't help you. Lena, not here. Not tonight." "Did you?" Her breath hitched. "Did you send them?" "If I had sent someone, they would be inside, and we wouldn't be having this conversation," he said dryly. "You're not safe alone anymore. You stepped into my world yesterday. Even by accident, that makes you visible. And in my world, visibility is dangerous." "I didn't ask for this," she cried, tears finally spilling over. "I just wanted my dog back. Intent is irrelevant. Consequence is everything. Come across the hall. Now." "No," she said, her voice shaking but stubborn. "I'm not going in there again. I'm staying here. Stubbornness is a luxury you cannot afford tonight. I'm locking my door. Leave me alone." She hung up. She sat in the bathroom for an hour, holding a kitchen knife she had grabbed from the counter, waiting for the door to crash down. It didn't. Eventually, the silence stretched too long. Curiosity, or perhaps the need to know if she was about to die, forced her to stand. She crept to the front door and looked through the peephole. Her breath caught. Standing directly outside her door, back to the wall, was a man. It wasn't the intruder. It was one of the men from lunch yesterday, the large one, Gianni. He was standing guard, his arms crossed, a distinct bulge under his jacket implying a weapon. And the lock, she looked closer, the jamb, which had been slightly loose for years, looked brand new. The scratches on the paint from the earlier attempt were gone. He had fixed her door. He had placed a guard. Rage, hot and clarifying, flooded her system. He was taking over. He was suffocating her. She threw the door open. Gianni turned to look at her, his face impassive. "I want to see him," she demanded. Gianni simply nodded and keyed a radio on his lapel. "She's coming." He gestured to the penthouse door. It was already open. Lena marched across the hall, barefoot, wearing her oversized gray sweater and leggings. She didn't care about the luxury this time. She cared about her life. She stormed into the foyer. The penthouse was dimmer tonight, lit by recessed amber lights that made the marble glow. Music was playing softly, something classical, heavy on the cello. "Matteo," she called out, "in here." His voice came from the living area. She followed it. The space was cavernous, dominated by a wall of glass that looked out over the entire city skyline. The view was worth millions, but the room felt cold. Matteo was standing on the balcony. The glass doors slid open to the night air. He was not wearing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were corded with muscle. He held a tumbler of amber liquid. He didn't turn as she entered. "I told you to pack a bag." "And I told you to leave me alone," Lena snapped. Stepping out onto the balcony, the wind whipped her hair across her face. "You put a guard at my door. You fixed my lock. You sent me money like I'm some kind of charity case." He turned then, slowly. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. The money was a courtesy. The guard is a necessity. The lock was offensive. I couldn't let it stand. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice rising over the wind. "I'm nobody. I paint flowers. I pay my rent late. Why do you care if someone breaks in?" He took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of the glass. Because the man who tried to break in wasn't looking for a television. Lena, he was looking for leverage. Lena went still. "What?" "One of my rivals," Matteo said, his voice devoid of emotion, as if discussing the weather. "He has eyes on the building. He saw you enter my home yesterday. He saw you sit at my table. He saw you leave with your life." He took a step toward her. "In this city, people do not walk out of my dining room unless they are family or business. He assumes you are one or the other. He thinks you matter to me." The air left Lena's lungs. "So because I came to get my dog, I have a target on my back?" "Precisely." She backed away until her spine hit the cold glass railing of the balcony. "This is insane. You have to tell them. Tell them I'm nothing." "They wouldn't believe me," Matteo said. He moved closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of whiskey and night air. "And even if they did, they would hurt you just to see if I reacted, to test the theory. I hate you," she whispered. The words felt true, but they lacked heat. They were born of fear. "That is a sensible reaction," he murmured. He reached out. Lena flinched, but she didn't run. His hand, large and warm, settled on the small of her back. The heat of his palm seeped through her sweater, branding her again. "Is this how you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You create the danger, and then you step in to save the day. Is this how you control people?" Mateo's expression shifted. The mask of amusement fell away, replaced by something stark and undeniably weary. "No," he said softly. "I did not create this danger. Lena, I inherited it, and I do not wish to control you." His thumb brushed against her spine, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. "This is how I protect them." Lena looked up at him. She saw the lines of tension around his mouth, the hardness in his jaw that never seemed to relax. She saw a man who lived in a fortress of his own making, a man who was just as trapped as she was, only his cage was made of gold and blood. "I don't want this," she whispered. "I don't want your protection." "Then tell me to let you go," he said. His voice dropped to a rough murmur. He stepped in closer, his body shielding her from the wind, from the city, from the view of anyone watching below. "Tell me to send the guard away. Tell me to close this door and never speak to you again. Say it, and I will do it." She opened her mouth to say the words. "Go away. Leave me alone." But the words died in her throat, because if he left, she would be alone in that hallway. If he left, the cold would come back. And looking at him now, seeing the raw intensity in his gaze, she realized with a jolt of horror that she didn't want him to leave. She wanted to know what it felt like to be the thing he protected. She said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and electric, charged with the unspoken. Mateo watched her, his eyes searching hers. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw the surrender. He set his glass down on the railing with a sharp clink. "You are a fool," he whispered, but the words were affectionate. He lowered his head. Lena stopped breathing. When his lips brushed hers, it wasn't a seizing, it was a question. He waited, hovering just a breath away, giving her one last chance to escape. She didn't run. She reached up, her fingers tangling in the fabric of his shirt, and pulled him down. The kiss broke the dam. He groaned, a low sound in his throat, and his arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him. He was hard everywhere she was soft. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent, tasting of whiskey in desperation. It was the collision of two different worlds, violent and inevitable. He swept her up into his arms effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing. Lena buried her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling him, her heart pounding in a rhythm that matched his. He carried her inside, away from the cold balcony, the glass doors sliding shut behind them to seal out the world. In the dim light of his bedroom, the atmosphere changed. The urgency bled away, replaced by a reverence that stunned her. He laid her down on the massive bed, the sheets cool against her skin. He didn't rush. He stood over her for a moment, just looking, as if memorizing the way her hair fanned out against the pillows. When he joined her, he was careful. His hands, which she knew could hold weapons and command armies, were incredibly gentle. He traced the line of her jaw, the curve of her shoulder, treating her skin like the watercolor paper she worked with, something fragile, something that could tear if handled roughly. "Mateo," she breathed, his name feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. "I have you," he murmured against her skin. "I have you." They moved together in the shadows, a dance of hesitation and discovery. Lena felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming release of it. For so long, she had been holding herself together, staying small, staying hidden. With him, she couldn't hide. He demanded all of her, and in return, he gave her a physical weight, a grounding force that anchored her drifting soul. He kissed the pulse at her throat, the scar on her knee, the inside of her wrist. He explored her like she was something precious, something rare that he had found and intended to keep. And Lena, who had spent her life afraid of the loud and the dangerous, held on to the mafia boss as if he were the only safe place left in the world. She held him like she was terrified to want him, but even more terrified to let him go. Outside, the city continued its chaotic churn, and the men in the black cars waited. But in the penthouse, in the dark, There was only the sound of their breathing and the quiet, terrifying promise of a bond that had already sealed their fate. The morning light in the penthouse was aggressive. It poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls not as a gentle awakening, but as a stark, blinding revelation. Lena woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs before her eyes even opened. For a fraction of a second, the smell of cedar and expensive cologne confused her, replacing the familiar scent of her own lavender laundry detergent. Then, memory crashed into her. She was in Matteo De Laurentiis' bed. She sat up, clutching the charcoal gray sheet to her chest. The room was massive, minimalist, and intimidatingly masculine. The bed she was in could have comfortably slept 4 people. To her left, the space was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. She felt a wave of heat wash over her face, not from the sun, but from shame. It was a thick, suffocating feeling. She had spent her life being the careful one, the invisible woman who crossed the street to avoid loud groups of men, the woman who triple-checked her locks. And last night, driven by fear and a sudden, inexplicable madness, she had slept with the man everyone in the building terrifiedly whispered about. "You are awake." The voice came from the balcony doorway. Lena snapped her head around. Matteo was there. He was already fully dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, looking as though he hadn't just spent the night unraveling her. He was holding a phone to his ear, his posture rigid. He held up a finger, signaling her to wait, and turned back to the glass. He spoke into the phone, his voice low but vibrating with a suppressed, lethal anger. He was speaking Italian. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the sound of a verdict being delivered. It was hard, clipped, and devoid of mercy. He hung up and slid the phone into his pocket, turning his full attention to her. The hardness in his face softened instantly when he looked at her, but the transition was jarring. It was like watching a wolf transform into a guard dog. "Coffee?" he asked. "I need to go," Lena said, her voice raspy. She scrambled to the edge of the bed, looking around for her clothes. Her gray sweater was folded neatly on a leather armchair, her leggings beside it. "I made a mistake. I shouldn't be here." Matteo didn't move to stop her, but he didn't step aside either. "It was not a mistake, Lena, but you are right to be anxious. The situation has evolved." Lena paused, her sweater half pulled over her head. She emerged from the wool, her hair a chaotic mess, her eyes wide. "Evolved? What does that mean?" "It means the man who targeted you yesterday has not lost interest," Matteo said calmly. He walked over to the chair and picked up her leggings, handing them to her. "You can stay here, as long as you want. You will be safe behind these doors. No one gets in unless I allow it." Lena snatched the leggings from him. "I can't live in your guest room. Matteo, I have a job. I have a life. I have a dog who needs to go outside." "Peanut is being walked by Gianni," Matteo said. "He is fine. I want to go home," she insisted. Stepping into her pants, she felt frantic, a need to reclaim the boundaries she had let dissolve the night before. "I appreciate the protection, but I am not your girlfriend. I am not part of your world. I'm just a freelance artist who lives in 12A. Matteo watched her struggle to put her shoes on, his expression unreadable. "You can go back to 12A, he said finally, "but I am offering to move you. I have a property uptown. Quiet, secure, anonymity." "No," Lena said firmly, standing up and facing him. She felt small in her socks against his height, but she locked her knees to stop them from shaking. "I am not running away. I've spent my whole life running away from things that scared me. I'm not letting some invisible thug chase me out of my own apartment." Matteo studied her for a long moment. A flicker of respect passed through his dark eyes. "Very well, but understand this. If you stay across the hall, you stay visible. I cannot pull the men back now. If I withdraw security, it signals weakness. So there will be eyes on you. Always." "I don't care," she lied. "Just let me go." He stepped aside. As she brushed past him, he caught her arm, gentle but firm. "Lena." She stopped, not looking at him. "Last night," he murmured, his voice dropping to that register that made her stomach flip. "Do not call it a mistake. Call it what you like. Fear, adrenaline, curiosity, but do not lie to yourself." She pulled her arm free and fled the penthouse. The hallway crossing was only 10 feet, but it felt like crossing a canyon. She fumbled with her keys, rushed inside her apartment, and locked the door. Peanut was already there, curled on his bed, looking well-fed and traitorously happy. Lena spent the next 3 days in a state of high-functioning paranoia. True to his word, Matteo did not come to her door, but his presence was everywhere. When she went to the lobby to check her mail, she saw a man in a beige jacket reading a newspaper near the fountain. He didn't look at her, but when she moved, he turned the page. When she took Peanut to the park, a gray sedan idled at the corner, turning only when she turned. She was free, but she was in a cage without bars. The building itself seemed to turn against her. The Navarro Grand was a vertical village, and news traveled faster than the elevators. On Tuesday evening, Lena found herself in the elevator with Mrs. Vanderbilt from the 14th floor, a woman who usually ignored Lena's existence entirely. As the doors slid shut, Mrs. Vanderbilt adjusted her silk scarf and stared straight ahead. "It is unwise," she said to the metal doors, "to mix with the predatory animals. Dear, even if they have nice suits." Lena stiffened. "Excuse me? We all see the men outside your door." "Mrs. Vanderbilt said, her tone dripping with disdain. "We see the car following you. You're bringing trouble to a respectable address. If you had any sense, you'd end whatever arrangement you have before the rent comes due in blood." The elevator dinged at 12. Lena walked out, her face burning. They didn't see her as a victim. They saw her as a participant, a mistress, a complication. By Thursday, the isolation was gnawing at her. She hadn't sold a painting in a week. She jumped at every noise, and, most humiliating of all, she missed him. She missed the feeling of absolute safety she had felt in his arms. That evening, a heavy envelope slid under her door. It wasn't cash this time. It was thick. Expensive cardstock, dinner tonight, 8 o'clock, dress for the view. She should say no. She knew she should say no. She looked at her reflection in the hallway mirror. Pale, tired, wearing sweatpants. She looked like a woman waiting for permission to live. At 8 o'clock, she knocked on the penthouse door. She wore the only formal dress she owned, a vintage navy slip dress she had bought at a thrift store years ago. It was simple, clinging to her frame, leaving her shoulders bare. Matteo opened the door himself. He stopped dead when he saw her. His eyes swept over her, devouring the sight, before returning to her face. The hunger in his gaze was so raw it almost knocked the wind out of her. "You came," he said simply. "I was hungry." She deflected, her voice shaky. He led her inside. The penthouse had been transformed. The overhead lights were off. The massive living space was lit by dozens of thick, white pillar candles placed on the floor, the tables, and the mantel. The city lights outside were a glittering backdrop, but the room felt intimate and closed. A small table was set for two near the window, covered in white linen. The dinner was exquisite. Risotto with truffles, a salad of bitter greens, a wine that tasted like velvet. But they barely ate. The air between them was thick with unsaid things. Matteo watched her over the candle flame. He looked tired. Lena realized there were shadows beneath his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Why?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Why do you keep involving me? Matteo, you could have any woman in this city, women who understand your life, women who aren't afraid of their own shadows. Why do you keep pulling me back in?" Matteo set his wine glass down. He looked out at the city, at the empire he supposedly ruled, then back at her. "You remind me of a life I might have had," he said quietly. Lena frowned. "What life? The starving artist's life?" "The quiet life," he corrected. "The life where a man comes home and doesn't have to check the perimeter. The life where the biggest tragedy is a burnt dinner or a leak in the roof." He reached across the table, his hand hovering palm up. He didn't touch her. He waited. Slowly, Lena placed her hand in his His fingers closed around hers, warm and rough. "I look at you, Lena, and I see something untouched," he whispered. "You have been hurt, yes. I see the bruises on your spirit, but you have not been corrupted. In my world, everyone is gray. Everyone has a price. You just wanted your dog." Lena felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm not untouched. Mateo, I'm just quiet. There's a difference. To me, it is the same," he said intensely. "You are the only thing in my day that makes sense." The vulnerability in his voice, coming from a man who could command violence with a phone call, shattered her defenses. She stood up. He stood with her. They met in the middle of the room, surrounded by the flickering candlelight. This time, there was no frantic desperation. This time, when he kissed her, it was slow. It was a question asked and answered in silence. He led her to the bedroom, but the energy was different. It wasn't about possession. It was about worship. He undressed her slowly, his hands trembling slightly, as if she were made of glass. When they lay together, his touch was reverent. He traced the line of her hip, the curve of her spine, whispering things in Italian against her skin that sounded like prayers. The act itself was aching, deep, and profoundly emotional. Lena felt herself opening up in ways that had nothing to do with her body. She felt the walls she had built around her heart crumbling, brick by brick. When it was over, they lay tangled in the sheets, the room silent save for their breathing. And then, Lena started to cry. It wasn't a sob. It was a silent, steady stream of tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. Mateo didn't ask why. He didn't panic. He pulled her against his chest, wrapping his large arms around her, and just held her. He stroked her hair, resting his chin on the top of her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his chest after a long time. "I don't know why I'm crying." "Do not apologize," he rumbled. She lay there, listening to the steady thud of his heart. "I've always been the weak one," she confessed, the words spilling out into the dark. "My ex, David, used to tell me I was too sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. He made me feel like my feelings were a burden, like I was a burden." Mateo's arm tightened around her. "And my father," she continued, her voice barely audible. "He was the same. He didn't hit us. He just eroded us. He made us feel small so we could feel big. I learned to be quiet because if I was quiet, I wasn't a target." She looked up at him, her eyes wet. "That's why I was so scared of you. You're big. You take up so much space. I thought you would crush me." Mateo looked down at her, his expression fierce and tender. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Those men were weak," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "A man who needs to make a woman feel small is not a man. He's a boy throwing stones at a stained glass window because he hates that it is beautiful." He kissed her forehead. "I do not want you to be quiet. Lena, scream if you have to. Break things. I will never ask you to be small." For the first time in her life, Lena believed him. She fell asleep in his arms, feeling not small but protected. She woke up in the middle of the night. The bed was empty again, but this time she heard the shower running. She needed to check on Peanut. She slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in Mateo's discarded dress shirt, and padded out to the living room. She decided to run across the hall quickly to feed the dog and come back before Mateo got out of the shower. She crossed the hallway. The guard wasn't there. Likely on a break or patrolling the stairwell, she keyed into her apartment. "Peanut?" she called softly. The dog trotted out from the bedroom, tail wagging. Lena smiled and moved to the kitchen to fill his bowl. Crash. The sound was explosive. The living room window, the one facing the alley, shattered inward. Shards of glass sprayed across the hardwood floor. Lena screamed and dropped to the floor, covering her head. Peanut barked frantically, backing into the corner. Something heavy thudded onto the rug amidst the glittering debris. Silence followed. The wind howled through the broken pane, ballooning her curtains, trembling, her heart beating so fast she thought she might faint. Lena crawled toward the object. It was a rock, a jagged piece of concrete. Actually, wrapped around it with a rubber band was a piece of paper. She reached out, her fingers shaking uncontrollably, and pulled the paper free. She unfolded it. He can't protect you forever. The front door of her apartment burst open. Lena screamed again, scrambling backward over the glass. It was Matteo. He stood in the doorway, wearing only sweatpants, his chest bare and heaving. He held a black pistol in his right hand, the muzzle pointed at the floor. His eyes were wild, scanning the room until they landed on her. "Lena!" He crossed the room in 2 strides, ignoring the glass crunching under his bare feet. He dropped to his knees beside her, holstering the gun at the waistband of his pants in one fluid motion. "Are you hurt?" He grabbed her shoulders, his hands checking her arms, her face. "Did it hit you?" "No," she sobbed, shoving the note into his chest. "No, I'm fine. It's just the window." Matteo took the note. He read it. The change that came over him was terrifying. The concern vanished, replaced by a cold, blank mask of pure violence. His eyes went dead. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He crumpled the note in his fist. "Get up," he said. His voice was devoid of humanity. He pulled her to her feet. He picked up Peanut with one hand and guided Lena out of the apartment with the other. He didn't look at the broken window. He didn't look at the glass. He walked her back across the hall, into the penthouse, and sat her down on the sofa. He went to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of brandy, pouring a glass and pressing it into her hand. "Drink." "Matteo," she whispered, watching him pace. He was radiating energy, like a downed power line thrashing on the pavement. "What are you going to do?" He stopped pacing. He looked at her, but she felt like he wasn't seeing her. He was seeing a map, a strategy, a list of names. "I am going to handle it," he said. "Please," she begged. Setting the glass down, she stood up and reached for him. "Please don't hurt anyone. Just call the police. We have the rock. We have the note. The police fill out paperwork." "Lena!" he roared. The volume made her flinch. He saw it and instantly reined himself in, his jaw clenching. "I am sorry," he said, his voice quiet again, but tighter. "But you do not understand. This was not a prank. This was a message. They threw a rock through your window while you were inside. Next time, it will be a firebomb or a bullet." He walked to the bedroom and came out a moment later, pulling a black t-shirt over his head. He began putting on his shoes. "Where are you going?" she cried. "To ensure that forever is a very long time," he said grimly. "Matteo, please." She grabbed his arm. "If you go out there and kill someone, how are you any different than them? You said you wanted a different life. You said I reminded you of it." He stopped. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her tear-streaked face. For a moment, she thought she had reached him. She thought the man who had held her so tenderly an hour ago would win. But then he gently peeled her fingers off his arm. "I do want that life, Lena," he said, "but I cannot have it while my enemies breathe." He turned and walked out the door. The heavy lock clicked shut, sealing her in the silence of the penthouse, alone. Matteo returned 4 hours after the sun had risen. Lena had not slept. She had sat on the leather sofa in his living room, wrapped in a cashmere throw blanket that felt like a cage, and watched the city wake up. Peanut had dozed at her feet, oblivious. When the penthouse door finally opened, she flinched so violently she almost spilled the cold coffee she was holding. He walked in, and she knew instantly that he had not just handled it, he had destroyed it. His black t-shirt was gone, replaced with a dark gray Henley she hadn't seen before. His face was a mask of granite, but it was his hands that scared her. They were raw at the knuckles, scrubbed clean but still red. He had not just given an order, he had participated. He looked at her, his eyes hollowed out by the long night. "It's done," he said. The words were flat, final. "Who?" she started, her voice a dry rasp. "What did you do?" "You don't want to know," he said. He didn't say it unkindly. He said it as a statement of fact, a protection. "The man who threw the rock won't be throwing anything again?" He walked over to her and crouched, his hands resting on his knees. He looked, for the first time, exhausted. But he was just a soldier. "Lena, the man who sent him is still out there. Your apartment is compromised. It will never be safe again, so what happens?" she whispered. terrified of the answer. "You stay here," he said. "Gianni and one of my men are clearing out your essentials right now. Your art supplies, your clothes, the rest we can replace." And so, Lena Moore officially moved into the penthouse. It was not a decision, it was a surrender. Peanut adjusted immediately. He discovered the softness of the expensive rugs, the warmth of the sun-drenched marble, and the fact that Gianni often carried scraps of prosciutto in his pocket. Lena did not adjust. She felt like a ghost haunting a palace of shadows. The penthouse was vast, silent, and cold. Her art supplies sat in a corner of the massive guest room she'd been given, untouched. Her watercolors felt frivolous here. Her peonies a childish insult to the stark, brutalist reality of Matteo's life. She had no keys. She had no schedule. She had no destination. Her life, which had been small but her own, was now entirely defined by his. She was a bird in a gilded cage, and the cage wasn't even hers. Days blurred. She would wake up alone in the guest room. She never went back to his bed, and he didn't push, and find him already gone, departed for a world she couldn't see. He would return late, the scent of the city and his power clinging to him. He would find her in the living room, reading a book she couldn't focus on, and his relief at seeing her safe was a tangible thing. But she was being watched. She felt it every second. The guards at the elevator, Matteo's men, were polite, but their eyes followed her. They were his, and she was, by extension, his property. Then there was Sophia. Lena had ventured into the kitchen one afternoon, a sprawling stainless steel and marble expanse she usually avoided, in a desperate search for a simple apple. Sophia was there, perched on a stool, sipping an espresso, looking as if she had been carved from ice. "Well, well," Sophia said, her red lips curving into a smile that held no warmth. "The stray is learning its way around the house?" Lena froze, her hand halfway to the fruit bowl. "I was just looking for a snack?" Sophia's laugh was a high, tinkling sound. "Be careful, darling. The food here is very rich. You might develop a taste you can't afford." "I don't know what you mean," Lena said, her cheeks burning. Sophia slid off the stool and walked toward her, circling her slowly, like a predator inspecting its prey. "My brother is a man of intense appetites," she murmured, adjusting the lapel of Lena's borrowed robe. "He enjoys his hobbies. He loves stray dogs. He loves projects. But the thing about hobbies, Lena, is that eventually they get put back in the box when he's done with them." She tapped a long, manicured finger against Lena's cheek. "You are just a temporary thrill, a palate cleanser. Do not mistake his protection for affection. When the real danger comes, he will close this door, and you will be on the outside with the rest of the world. Remember that." The words struck home, echoing the deepest fear Lena had been nursing, that she was nothing but a complication, a brief, interesting diversion. That night, when Matteo came home, he found her huddled on the balcony, the one where they had first kissed. The wind was cold, but she didn't seem to notice. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. "You're freezing," he rumbled. "I feel like I'm disappearing," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know who I am in this place. I'm not an artist. I'm not a neighbor. I'm just the woman you're hiding." He held her tighter, his jaw resting on the top of her head. He was silent for a long time. "I see you," he said finally. "Even when you don't, I see you." He continued to keep her close, a possessive, grounding force. The nights were a different kind of imprisonment. He would come to her guest room, and without a word, she would let him in. Their physical relationship had become a desperate, wordless conversation. It was the only place they could speak the truth. His touch was fierce, almost frantic, as if he were trying to memorize her skin, to hold on to the one piece of untouched life he had. She, in turn, clung to him, not with fear, but with a raw, aching need. She was losing herself, and he was the only thing she had to hold on to. He must have seen the light in her dimming, the vibrant watercolor of her soul fading to a dull, anxious gray. One night, after a particularly tense week of hushed phone calls and locked-door meetings, he came into her room. She was sketching, for the first time in days, her face tight with concentration. "Pack a bag," he said. Her heart dropped. "What? Is it happening? Am I leaving?" "We are leaving," he corrected. "Just for 2 days. Pack for the beach. No heels." He took her to a private coastal house 3 hours south of Los Navarro. It wasn't a mansion. It was a simple, modern structure of wood and glass, perched on a rugged cliffside overlooking a stretch of black sand beach. The air was cold and clean, smelling of salt and pine. The simplicity of the place disarmed them both. There were no guards visible, though Lena knew that they were somewhere close. There was no marble, only worn wooden floors. There was no city, only the vast, roaring, empty ocean. For the first day, they barely spoke. They walked barefoot on the cold, wet sand, Peanut chasing the waves with delirious joy. They built a fire in the living room fireplace and sat on the floor, sharing a bottle of wine. That night, they slept in the same bed, but it was different from the penthouse. There was no desperation, no claiming. They just slept, tangled in each other, two exhausted people finding warmth. Lena woke up with her head on his chest, his arms locked around her, his breathing deep and even. It was the first time she'd seen him fully at rest. The next afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip toward the water, he finally opened up. "My father," he said, his voice quiet, "was not a good man. He was a powerful man, but not a good one." Lena waited, sensing he needed the silence. He believed weakness was the only sin, not violence, not betrayal, weakness. He stared out at the ocean, his eyes seeing something far away. "When I was 9 years old, he brought me to a meeting. One of his men had been skimming, a small amount, not even enough to matter." His hand, resting on the arm of the chair, clenched into a fist. "He made me watch. He made me watch as they handled it. He told me, 'This is the cost of loyalty, Mateo. This is the price of a name.' He put my hand on the gun afterward, to feel the heat. I was 9. Lena's heart ached. She reached out and placed her hand over his fist. She didn't speak. She just held on. "I rose to power too early," he continued, his voice rough. "He died when I was 19. I had to take over, or my family would have been torn apart. I had to become him, just to survive. I never had a choice." He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers, holding on tight. "That's what I saw in you. Lena, in the dining room, you were terrified, but you didn't break. You just existed. You were all choices. You were all light." "Mateo," she whispered, tears in her eyes, "have you ever wanted to leave this life?" He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a raw, painful honesty. "With you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Maybe. Without you. Never." The return to the city was like a physical blow. The salt air was replaced by exhaust. The sound of the ocean was replaced by the incessant, angry ringing of Mateo's phone. The peace they had found was shattered the moment they stepped back into the penthouse. Mateo was different. He was harder, angered, his patience worn thin. The coastal trip had shown him what he could have, and the city was reminding him of what he was. The call came on a Friday evening. Lena was in the kitchen, actually trying to cook. When Mateo's phone rang, he answered it, and his entire body became rigid. "Where?" he said, his voice a low growl. "Is he I.C.? No, do not move him. Do not touch anything. I am coming." He hung up the phone and stood, unmoving. For 10 seconds, he looked broken. "Mateo?" Lena asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "What is it? What's wrong?" "It's Marco," he said, his voice hollow. "Marco?" The older man from the lunch, the one who had looked like a Roman coin, the one who had been with his father for 30 years. "He was found," Mateo said, his voice shaking with a rage that was almost grief. "He was in his car, near your old building." Lena's blood ran cold. "Near my building? Why?" "He was checking the perimeter," Mateo roared, slamming his fist onto the marble counter. "He was checking on you, even though you were with me. He was double-checking the safe house I was arranging. And they found him. They put 3 bullets in his head. He was spiraling, shaken. enraged. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No," he snapped, grabbing her by the shoulders. His grip was painfully tight. "This is their fault, and they will pay, but not with you." He released her and stormed toward the bedroom. "Pack a bag." "We're going back to the beach?" she asked. "Hopefully." "You are," he said, emerging from the closet with a duffel bag. "You're leaving the country." "I have a plane. I have people in Italy. You will go tonight, and you will not come back until I tell you it is safe." He was pushing her away. He was putting her in a box, just like Sophia said he would. "No," Lena said. Matteo stopped zipping the bag. "Excuse me?" "No," she said, louder this time. Her voice didn't shake. "I'm not going. This is not a discussion. Lena, Marco is dead. They are coming for you. This is the only way to protect you. And what happens to you?" she demanded, stepping in front of him. "You stay here. You go to war. And I sit in some farmhouse in Tuscany, waiting for a call to tell me you're dead? Is that the plan?" "That is the plan if it keeps you alive," he shouted. "No," she shouted back, jabbing a finger into his chest. He was so surprised by the act of defiance, he actually took a step back. "I am done running. I ran from David. I ran from my family. I am not running again, not from them, and not from you." She was terrified. Her knees were knocking, but she held his gaze. "They threw a rock through my window. Matteo, they killed your friend. I'm not some temporary thrill you can ship off when it gets hard. You wanted me in your world? You said I was visible? Well, here I am. I am not leaving." She took a deep breath, her chest aching. "This time," she said, her voice dropping, but losing none of her strength, "I want to stay, and I want to fight." Matteo stared at her, his face a complex mask of shock, fury, and a new, terrifying respect. He was looking at her, but he wasn't seeing the stray from 12A. He was seeing, for the first time, a woman who was just as stubborn and just as strong as he was. The silence in the penthouse after her declaration was louder than any gunshot. Matteo stared at Lena, his face a mask of disbelief that slowly, chillingly, morphed into something else. It was not anger. It was a dark, profound resignation. He had offered her the gilded cage, and she had refused. He had offered her the escape hatch, and she had welded it shut. He took a step back and surveyed her, not as a lover, but as a general assessing a new, unpredictable variable. "All right," he said. The word was low, rough. "You stay." He walked to the bar, his back to her, and poured himself a whiskey. He did not offer her one. "But the rules are over. Lena, there is no more 12A. There is no more your life and my life. There is only this." He gestured to the glass walls, the city, the cold marble floor. "You want to fight? Then you will be a soldier. And soldiers do not get to be untouched. You stay." He turned, his eyes black pits. "You accept what I am. You accept what I will do to keep you. There is no gray area left." Lena's victory felt like swallowing glass. She had won the argument, but she had lost her last sliver of plausible deniability. She had just consented to her own corruption. The next few weeks were a descent. Matteo did not send her to Italy, but he placed her on an invisible leash so short it choked her. The penthouse, once her fortress, became her prison. She was not allowed to leave, not to the lobby, not to the gym, not even to the hallway. Gianni, his face etched with a new, somber gravity, was no longer her friendly guard. He was her jailer, posted outside the penthouse door, which was now always locked. She was being watched, not just by Matteo's enemies, but by his family. His sister, Sophia, would appear for dinners, her stilettos clicking on the marble like ice picks. She would watch Lena with a cool, predatory amusement, as if waiting for her to break. Lena's art supplies gathered dust. What was the point of painting flowers when the air smelled of iron and fear? She was questioning her limits, just as Sophia had predicted. What did it mean to love a man, to truly, physically, and emotionally ache for a man, whose hands she knew had just signed off on someone's death? She loved the man who had held her on the beach. She feared the man who returned from his late-night meetings, his suit jacket smelling faintly of cigar smoke and cold steel. The two men were the same. This was the cognitive dissonance that was breaking her. She saw the darker side one Tuesday evening. Matteo had been in his office, a room she was forbidden to enter, for hours. She heard voices, low and angry, then a thud. She'd been pacing the living room, restless and jumpy, and the sound drew her in. She crept down the long, dark hallway. The heavy office door was open, just a crack. She told herself to turn around, to go back to the living room, to put on the television, but she couldn't. She looked through the crack. Matteo was not alone. Gianni stood by the window, his arms crossed. And in the center of the room, strapped to a steel office chair, was a man. He was one of Matteo's own guards, a younger one she recognized from the elevator, a man named Paolo. His face was a mess of blood and swelling. Matteo stood in front of him, perfectly calm. He was not in a suit. He was in his shirt sleeves. His tie loosened. He held no weapon. "You let them in," Matteo said. It was not a question. "You gave them the codes for the service elevator. You told them when Marco was leaving. He said they just wanted to talk." Paolo sobbed, blood and saliva stringing from his mouth. He said, "Just a warning. He paid me. I have a kid. My boss. A kid," Matteo repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Marco had a wife. He had 2 daughters." He stepped closer, and Lena saw him reach into his pocket. He took out a simple, elegant Zippo lighter. He flicked it open. The flame illuminated his face, making his eyes look like empty sockets. "I will ask you once, Paolo, who was the contact?" The man shook his head, his eyes wide with terror. "I can't. He'll kill my family." "I will," Matteo corrected him, his voice a whisper that cut through the room. He didn't touch the man's face with the flame. He moved to the man's left hand, which was strapped to the armrest. He held the flame under the man's smallest finger. Paolo screamed. It was a high, thin, terrible sound that Lena felt in her teeth. She clapped her hands over her mouth to stifle her own cry. Controlled violence, she thought. Hysteria rising in her throat. This was what he had been taught at 9 years old. This was not rage. This was work. She must have made a sound, a gasp, a footstep. Matteo's head snapped up. He looked past the screaming man, past the blood, and his eyes locked directly with hers through the crack in the door. He did not look ashamed. He did not look surprised. He just looked at her, his gaze flat and cold, as if to say, "This is what you accepted. Look at it." He held her gaze for a full, terrible second, then nodded to Gianni. Gianni moved, his face grim. He pulled the office door shut, the heavy thud of the lock clicking into place, plunging Lena back into the darkness of the hallway. She ran to the guest room, locked the door, and was violently sick in the adjoining bathroom. She lay on the cold tile floor for hours, shaking. Long after the screaming stopped, she didn't know when he came in. The bathroom door opened, casting a sliver of light across the floor. Matteo stood in the doorway. He had changed. He wore clean sweatpants and a t-shirt. He smelled of antiseptic soap. "He's gone," he said. Lena didn't move. She was curled into a ball, her cheek pressed against the cold porcelain of the tub. "Did you kill him?" she whispered. "No," Matteo said. He sounded weary. "Gianni is taking him to a clinic and then putting him on a plane somewhere cold. He will live. He will just never hold his child again." Lena sobbed, a dry, racking sound. Matteo entered the bathroom and sat on the floor, his back against the wall, a few feet from her. He did not try to touch her. "This is the reality. Lena," he said quietly. "This is the quiet part of the life you wanted to remind me of." That night, she couldn't sleep. The guest bed felt like a coffin. She went to the living room, to the glass wall, and stared at the city lights. She felt him before she saw him. He came up behind her, standing a few inches away, not touching. "You're terrified of me," he stated. Lena nodded, her reflection a pale, ghostly shape in the glass. "I am, and yet, you are still here." She turned, her eyes red-rimmed, her face raw. "I don't know where else to go. You are the monster under my bed, Matteo, but you're also the only one who's ever made me feel safe. How do I live with that?" Her voice broke. "Would you ever hurt me?" The question hung in the air, the only question that mattered. He didn't answer immediately. He knelt. The motion was so unexpected. It stole her breath. This man, who made others kneel, who broke fingers and ended lives, dropped to one knee on the cold marble floor. He was at her level. He was beneath her. He looked up at her, his dark eyes stripped bare of their power, showing her the exhausted 19-year-old boy he had once been. "Never," he whispered, his voice thick. "I would burn this city to the ground before I let one of my men lay a hand on you. I would let them carve me into pieces before I hurt you myself." He reached out and, with a hand that was shaking, he touched her cheek. "Even if it costs me everything, Lena, you are the one thing I will not break." She fell to her knees in front of him, her hands gripping the front of his shirt. "I'm so scared," she sobbed into his chest. "I know," he said, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her onto his lap as he sat back on the floor. "I know. I am too." They made love later, not in his bed or hers, but on the thick rug in front of the fireplace, with the city lights as their only witness. It was not like the first time, all fire and desperation. It was not like the nights since, all need and possession. It was slow. It was vulnerable. It was an act of profound and terrible sadness. His touch was a plea. His hands, the same hands that had held the lighter, were now impossibly mapping the curve of her spine, her hips, her jaw. He kissed her eyelids, her temples, the pulse at her throat, as if he were trying to heal the terror he had put there. And she held him, her fingers tracing the rigid line of his jaw, the hard muscles of his back, offering an absolution he didn't deserve, but she desperately needed to give. It felt like a goodbye. It was the last, quiet moment of two people who knew the world was about to end. The next morning, she woke up alone in the massive bed. The space beside her was cold. The penthouse was silent. Not just quiet, it was empty. The air, usually thrumming with Mateo's energy, was dead. She got up, wrapping a sheet around herself. "Mateo?" No answer. She found Sophia in the kitchen, drinking a latte, looking immaculate in a black silk suit. "He's gone," Sophia said, not bothering to look up from her phone. "Gone? Gone where?" Lena's heart started a low, dull panic. "Without saying goodbye? Oh, please," Sophia sneered. "My brother does not say goodbye. He concludes he left 2 hours ago. He's in a quiet war, little one. Paolo sang a very long, very high-pitched song last night. Mateo is going to visit the rival who hired him, and then he is going to visit the man that rival works for." She finally looked up, her dark eyes glittering with a cold, familial pride. "He's burning the city to the ground, just as he promised. Do not wait up." Lena spent the next 2 days in a silent, airless hell. The penthouse was a tomb. The guards were gone from the hallway. There was no one, just her and Peanut and the terrible, echoing silence. Sophia had been right. He had locked the door, and she was on the inside. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She just watched the door, praying for it to open. By the morning of the 3rd day, she was unraveling. The silence was a form of torture. She was going mad. She had to move. She had to breathe air that wasn't stale with fear. She went to the door. Gianni was not there. No one was there. He had pulled all his men. He had gone to war, and he had left her completely, utterly alone. "No," she whispered. "He wouldn't." She tried the handle. The door was locked. Of course. She looked at Peanut, who was whining at her feet. "We need air, buddy. We just need air." There was a private, walled-in garden on the 3rd-floor terrace, an amenity for the penthouse-level residents. She had seen it from the elevator. It was still inside the fortress. It was safe. She grabbed a spare key card she had seen Mateo stash in a kitchen drawer. It worked on the front door. She leashed Peanut, her hands shaking. Just for 10 minutes. Peanut. Just to feel the sun. The garden was empty. It was beautiful. A small patch of manicured green surrounded by high, ivy-covered walls. It was safe. She unclipped Peanut's leash. He ran to a patch of grass, and Lena turned her face up to the sky, closing her eyes. The sun felt amazing. She was still breathing. It was all going to be okay. She heard the click of the garden gate opening. "Mateo?" she said, spinning around, a smile of relief blooming on her face. It was not Mateo. Two men stood there. They were not wearing suits. They were wearing work clothes. They looked like janitors. "Lena Moore," one of them said. He had a thick, gravelly voice. He smiled, and his teeth were stained. Lena grabbed Peanut. "Who are you?" "We're friends of Paolo's," the man said, advancing. "And we're friends of the man who paid him. He's very unhappy with your boyfriend. He said Mateo took something from him. So we're going to take something from Mateo." Lena backed away, her heel hitting a stone planter. "Get away from me." "Or what?" The second man laughed. "You gonna scream? Who's gonna hear you, sweetheart? The king is gone. He left his castle wide open." They grabbed her. She fought, she kicked, she bit, but they were professionals. One grabbed Peanut, shoving the yelping dog into a canvas bag. The other clamped a hand over Lena's mouth, his other arm crushing her ribs. She was dragged out of the garden, down a service stairwell, and into the loading bay. She woke up on a cold cement floor. Her head throbbed. The air smelled of oil, rust, and the nearby ocean, a warehouse. She was in a large, dark space. Her hands were tied behind her back. Peanut was in a small crate nearby, whimpering. "Good," a voice said from the shadows. "She's awake." A man stepped into the single shaft of light from a dirty window. He was older, with a pockmarked face and dead eyes. He held a phone. "This is very simple," the man said. "You are bait. My employer wants the Los Navarro shipping lanes. Mateo De Laurentiis controls them. He's going to give them up in exchange for you." He dialed a number and put the phone on speaker. It rang once, twice. "What?" Mateo's voice. It was not a greeting. It was a growl. "Hello, Mateo," the man said, his voice slick. "You have been a very busy boy. You caused my employer a great deal of trouble last night." There was a dead, lethal silence on the other end. "Where is she?" "She's here. She's fine. For now." The man held the phone up for Lena. "Say hello, Kara." Lena stared at the phone. "Mateo," she whispered. "Put him on." Mateo's voice was dangerously calm. The man chuckled. "She's lovely. A little thin, but lovely. You're going to sign over the paperwork for the southern port. Mateo." "Everything. I'm on my way," Mateo said. "You hurt her. You harm one hair on her head, and I will not just kill you. I will—" "You're not in a position to make threats, boy," the man spat. "You have 1 hour." He hung up. He looked at Lena. "He's fast, but he's not that fast." He nodded to his men. "We move her. Now." Just as they moved to grab her, it happened. It was not a roar of gunfire. It was a series of precise, surgical sounds. Thud, thud. Two of the guards standing by the main bay door simply crumpled, their bodies hitting the concrete. The man with the pockmarked face yelled, "What the? Crack pop! Crack pop!" The lights overhead exploded, plunging the warehouse into near total darkness, lit only by the one dirty window. Someone screamed. A man yelled, "He's here!" Then silence. A silence worse than the screaming. "Where is he?" the pockmarked man yelled into the dark, pulling Lena up by her hair and pressing a gun to her temple. "Show yourself, De Laurentiis!" A shadow detached itself from the darkest corner of the warehouse. Mateo moved like a phantom. He was not the man from the beach. He was not the man who had knelt on the floor. He was a creature of pure, cold vengeance. He was silent. He was deadly. He was holding 2 pistols, one in each hand. He didn't fire. He just moved. The man holding Lena fired wildly into the dark. The bullet sparked off a metal beam. "There!" another man shouted. "Pop! Pop!" 2 more men went down. Mateo was in the center of the room before the pockmarked man could even adjust his aim. He was a blur. He kicked the man's wrist, hard. The gun clattered to the floor. Before the man could even react, Mateo had the muzzle of his own gun pressed under the man's chin. He didn't pull the trigger. He looked at Lena. His face was streaked with dirt and blood. His eyes were black. He was breathing hard. He just looked at her, and the entire world stopped. Then, with a savage, economical movement, he pistol-whipped the man, who collapsed in a heap. Mateo stood there, his chest heaving. He dropped both guns to the floor, and then he was at her side, his hands still shaking, fumbling to cut the ropes on her wrists. The moment she was free, she launched herself at him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face burying itself in his chest. He scooped her up, his left arm wrapping under her legs, his right arm crushing her to him, and carried her out of the warehouse. He didn't look back. As he walked past Peanut's crate, he kicked the flimsy lock, and the small dog scrambled out, following them. She was sobbing into his chest, clutching the fabric of his bloody shirt. She was covered in his blood. No, she realized, it wasn't his. She sobbed harder. He didn't speak. He just walked, carrying her away from the darkness. His grip on her so tight it hurt. His grip was the only thing holding the world together. He did not take her back to the penthouse, the black sedan, which had appeared from a side street like a loyal hound, drove them out of the city as the first gray light of dawn broke, painting the industrial wasteland in shades of ash and rose. Lena was wrapped in Mateo's suit jacket, which still smelled faintly of gunfire and his skin. She was wedged between him and the door, his arm a solid, non-negotiable bar across her lap. Peanut was a warm, trembling lump at her feet. Lena did not know where they were. She did not ask. She just watched the city dissolve into suburbs, then into farmland, then into a dense, primordial forest of pine and fog. After 3 hours, the car turned onto an unmarked gravel road, which wound upward for 20 minutes before arriving at a house that was less a structure and more a part of the landscape. It was built of dark wood, steel, and vast expanses of glass, and it was utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. It was a hidden estate, a fortress of solitude. For the first week, they did not speak of what happened. The words did not exist. They were suspended in a state of shared shock, a vacuum where the past was too horrific to touch and the future was a blank. White wall. Their life became a series of quiet, physical rituals. Lena would wake up in the master bedroom. He had not, even for a moment, let her sleep in a separate room, to find Mateo already awake, sitting in a chair by the window, just watching her breathe. He was ensuring she was still there, still real. She tended to the raw, scraped knuckles on his left hand, the ones he'd gotten from the warehouse floor. She would clean them with antiseptic and wrap them in fresh bandages, her touch gentle, her focus absolute. It was a task. It was something to do. He would sit, perfectly still, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw, his expression unreadable. He would cook, simple things, pasta with garlic and oil, omelets, and he would place a plate in front of her, and she would eat. They ate in silence at a massive oak table, the only sound the clinking of silverware on porcelain and the occasional sigh from Peanut, who was sleeping by the fire. They held each other. That was the main thing. They were two magnets that had finally, violently, snapped together, and any attempt to separate them was met with a visceral, panicked resistance. They would stand in the kitchen, him holding her from behind while he waited for water to boil. She would nap on the sofa, and he would lie on the floor beside her, his hand resting on her hair, at night. They slept in a tangle of limbs, a desperate, unconscious affirmation that they were both still alive. On the evening of the 7th day, the silence finally broke. A storm was raging outside, the wind howling through the pines, the rain lashing against the glass. A fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering, amber shadows over the room. Lena sat on the rug, her back against the sofa, watching the flames. Mateo was on the sofa behind her, reading a book, or pretending to. She reached up, her hand finding his. He took it, his fingers lacing with hers. She felt the thick, ropey line of a scar on his forearm, one she had traced 12 times that week. "Is this life worth it?" she asked. Her voice was a dry, unused thing, a rasp in the quiet room. Mateo went still. He did not pretend not to understand. He put his book down, he moved off the sofa, coming to sit on the floor in front of her. He took both her hands in his thumbs brushing her skin. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. She saw the man from the beach, the boy who had lost his childhood, "Not without you," he said. The words were a confession, rough and honest, and they struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had asked about the violence, the power, the blood. He had answered about her. "Lena," he said, his voice low, his grip tightening, "I am making a decision. What happened at that warehouse was the end. I am finished with the war." Lena frowned. "You can't just quit. Mateo, you're not a bank manager. You can't just give 2 weeks' notice." "No," he agreed, a small, grim smile touching his lips. "I cannot quit. But I can change the terms. I can restructure." He leaned in, his gaze intense, pinning her. "I have a cousin, Antonio. He's young, he's hungry. He loves the violence. He sees it as a sport. He does not understand the business. I am going to give him the parts of the business he loves, the streets, the security, the collections." "You're ceding power," she whispered. "Understanding. I am ceding the parts that will get me killed," he corrected. "The parts that almost got you killed. I am going to build something else. A legitimate front. Shipping, real estate. The money will be clean. Life will be quiet. It will take years. It will be a different kind of war. Fought in boardrooms, not warehouses. But it will be a life." He paused, and his vulnerability was a sharp, painful thing. "But I will only do it if you stay." The offer hung in the air. He was not just offering her safety. He was offering her his entire future. Laying it at her feet, he was the king. And he was asking permission from the stray he'd found in the hallway. Lena looked at the man in front of her. The monster. The savior. The man who had held a lighter to another man's hand. The man who had wept in her arms on a beach. The man who had torn the world apart to get her back. "I love you," she said. The words were out. They were simple. And they were the truest thing she had ever said. He flinched, as if she had struck him. He searched her eyes, looking for the lie. "I do," she insisted, her voice gaining strength. She brought a hand up to cup his rough, unshaven cheek. "I hate it. I hate how much I need you. I hate that I am not the woman I was, but I love you. I love how you see me. And I love—" Her voice broke. "I love how you never let me go." Mateo's composure, the iron control he had maintained his entire adult life, shattered. He bowed his head, pressing his forehead against hers. A sound, a rough, ragged groan, tore from his throat. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 20 years. He didn't speak. He just pulled her to him, his arms a vice, his face buried in her hair, and held her. That night, they shared one last passionate, perfect night in the woods. It was not a goodbye. It was a promise. It was the sealing of the new world they had just agreed to build. His touch was honest. There was no more worship, no more desperation. There was just him and her. He kissed her slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. He unwrapped her from her clothes, and she unwrapped him from his. And they stood in the moonlight streaming through the massive window. Two flawed, scarred people, finally seeing each other clearly. They made love on the thick rug, the fire casting them in gold. It was slow. It was a conversation. His hands on her skin said, "You are mine." Her hands in his hair said, "I am yours." They moved together, a silent, rhythmic vow, tangled in the moonlight and the silence, until the storm outside broke and the first clean light of their new life began to dawn. When Mateo returned to Los Navarro, he was a different man. The city felt the shift before it saw it. He moved with a cold, precise, and terrifyingly legal purpose. He called a meeting. His cousin, Antonio, a young, arrogant man with a love for gold chains, was given control of the family's traditional interests. Antonio, blinded by what he saw as a promotion, did not see the strings attached. He did not see that Mateo was giving him all the risk and none of the long-term profit. Mateo, meanwhile, established De Laurentiis Global Holdings. He used his vast illicit capital to buy a struggling shipping company and a portfolio of commercial real estate. He was a shark in a new ocean, and the corporate wolves were unprepared for his ruthlessness. His enemies, the ones who had survived his quiet war, backed off. They were confused. Matteo De Laurentiis was no longer on the streets. He was on the stock exchange. He was sponsoring charities. He was building, not breaking. They watched, and they waited, but they did not understand the new rules, and so they did not play. His sister, Sophia, understood. She saw the change in him. She saw the new focus, the lack of bloodlust, the new quiet light in his eyes. "You've gone soft," she'd accused him, standing in the penthouse, her suitcases at the door. "I've gone smart." "Sophia," he replied, signing a check. "It's her, isn't it? The little mouse. She's done this. She's made you weak." "She made me content," he'd said, and the word, so simple, was more powerful than any threat. Sophia had scoffed. "Contentment is for the dead. I'm going to Europe. At least the men there still know how to bleed for what they want." She left. And for the first time, Matteo's penthouse felt like a home. 2 months later, the final move was made. Matteo De Laurentiis, the city's most eligible and terrifying bachelor, publicly announced his engagement to Lena Moore. The news shocked everyone. The society pages were scandalized. The underworld was baffled. Mrs. Vanderbilt on the 14th floor reportedly dropped her teacup. The stray, the temporary thrill, the palate cleanser had become the queen. Lena did not read the papers. She was rebuilding. She had moved her art studio into one of the penthouse's empty, sun-drenched rooms. She painted, not flowers, but vast, abstract landscapes of shadow and light, of coastlines and storms. She painted under a new name, a simple pseudonym. Matteo had supported her without interfering. His only contribution, a quiet, anonymous purchase of her entire first collection by a European investor. She was building her own life, on her own terms, right beside his. On a crisp autumn afternoon, 6 months after it all began, Lena clipped the leash onto Peanut's harness. He was fatter now, spoiled by penthouse living. She took the elevator down. She walked through the lobby of the Navarro Grand, the same lobby where she used to scurry, invisible. The marble gleamed. The doorman, the same one who had watched her run for her life, smiled. "Good afternoon, Mrs. De Laurentiis." It was not yet true, but it was his assumption. "Good afternoon, Frank. Didn't expect to see you back here," he said, holding the door for her. He meant in the building, in this life. She turned, a small, faint smile playing on her lips. She thought of the terror, the blood, the chase. She thought of the girl in the paint-smeared leggings. "Neither did I," she said, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable confidence. Peanut tugged on the leash, eager for the park. Lena took a step toward the revolving door, but stopped. He was there. Matteo appeared beside her, sliding his hand into hers. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit, the uniform of his new war. He leaned down and kissed her temple, his eyes only for her. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she said. He did not walk her to the door. He turned, pulling her gently back toward the elevators. Frank, the doorman, watched, confused. "Aren't you going out?" he asked. Matteo smiled, that same devastating, amused smile from the very first day. "We live here now, Frank." He pressed the call button. The polished doors opened. He led Lena inside, his hand in hers, Peanut trotting happily at their heels. The elevator doors closed behind them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey with Lena and Matteo. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts. So please drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more.